Today is Saturday, September 23rd, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. For the past 20 years, I've been working actually 23 years, I've been working full-time as a classicist in education, first as a classroom teacher, then as a school administrator, and then as the founding headmaster of the academy. And so I've had a long time to study and learn and to pursue studies for their own sake and not as part of any degree program or artificial system of credits and grades. And now, as my life calms down, I enjoy the opportunity to go back to formal studies at the graduate level and have really appreciated this opportunity to re-engage with modern academic work at this point in my life. And I'd like to take some time to share some thoughts on modern scholarship for the sake of students in the academy, to help them to succeed in modern academic work, but also for any Catholic adults who would like to engage in scholarly research and writing. In most places, the students in college classes are learning a method of discussion with other people who are studying and writing. And this modern system of research and scholarly writing really goes back to the ideas of Francis Bacon, who was unhappy with what he judged to be the restrictions that scholastic philosophy and Catholic culture in general had placed on human learning. And he proposed a complete reset, what he called the New Instauration. He called for a complete reboot of human learning that would be grounded in what he considered to be a more robust, or I can just say more flexible and powerful method to develop and advance human learning. His ideas, which he expressed in his work Novum Organum, became the ideas that led to the formation of the modern university and the entire academic system that now exists around the world. And while this modern academic system has many excellent capabilities, or I really should say potential, it has potential for many excellent things, and we've experienced some of the fruits of its capabilities, there are very serious holes in this system that I believe Catholic students with classical education need to fill and have the opportunity to fill. And it's a very great opportunity because so much of this academic learning is stagnant. Yes, in the time of Bacon and through what was called the scientific revolution in the 1700s, when we see men like Isaac Newton making great advances through experimental research. And we see breakthroughs now and then as archaeologists may discover new artifacts or maybe even new texts, and these create opportunities for new insights into different fields. In many areas, the advancement of learning has leveled off and has become stagnant. That's why in the academy I always tell students that it's best to begin science and mathematics studies with textbooks from the early 1900s, because really not much has been developed since then, and the books from that period are very well written, and they're also in the public domain. So it offers us many benefits. And some can say, but what about recent developments? Well, there really aren't many recent developments, and it doesn't take much time to learn them. But what most modern students, using the latest textbooks and latest resources, they often miss out on the excellent writing ability of older scientists and mathematicians. And they get these modern junk food textbooks that cost $100 and are filled with all kinds of pictures and distracting digital vomit, really, just mess all over the pages. They just don't teach the sciences as students need to learn them to establish a strong foundation. And that's why I recommend older textbooks. But most of these fields have stagnated. And while there is new development now and then, it's really relatively insignificant, especially for students seeking to learn a science. But this stagnation in the sciences, I would argue, is really due to the fact that the kind of research that Francis Bacon promoted has more or less fulfilled its potential. And it's turned out to be far less productive than he would have expected. And you can point out modern technology like smartphones or robots, and this is often exaggerated because all we're doing is taking breakthroughs that were made 50 years ago or more, and we're just improving on them incrementally. Take the car, for example. We can look and see that Tesla is producing electric cars with computers, and they may be said to be self-driving and all of this high-tech stuff, but what you have is essentially the same form of a car that was present in a horse-drawn carriage, with the engine replacing the horse, but the carriage is still similar. You've got a refinement of some breakthrough. First it was the combustion engine in the early 1900s, and now we see a move, or at least a theoretical move, to electric motors in automobiles. But really all we're doing is refining a timeless idea of a horse-drawn carriage. And we may not even really be making advances, because if you think about it, in the horse-drawn carriage, we already had an ecologically friendly mode of transportation that was relatively self-sustaining. This is the end of all of this technology, is to try to produce what is ultimately going to become something like a horse-drawn carriage. I personally believe that all of this scientific research will lead us back to where we started from. If we're honest, acknowledging that nature already has the perfect forms of everything that's needed for human life and happiness. But these sciences, as you can see, they stagnate after a while, and it's the job of these scientists and businesses that relate to these sciences to use advertising to try and stir up this fascination with apparent advances. Like today, I saw an advertisement for the iPhone, 15? And, I mean, the iPhone was a breakthrough back around, 2006 or so? I know because I was teaching, and I remember my students beginning to show up with iPhones. So 2006, 2007, somewhere in there. And now we're 15, 16 years later, and we've got commercials and public announcements that are made to dramatize these new versions of the technology, and really, you've got an iPhone with some refinements. The technology has leveled off after the first breakthrough. And really, even these advances, they go back to World War era breakthroughs in radio communication and things like that. That's where the real breakthroughs took place. And that's some fascinating study, to study the breakthroughs that were mainly driven by the pressures and urgencies of war, which then had something of a civilian application when the wars ended. And we've continued to refine these breakthroughs, electricity, radio communication, and so on, over the past century or so. These are relatively new developments, but when you really boil them down to their essence, they're really not that big of a deal. But these sciences have stagnated. Historical studies have stagnated. Literary studies, there's hardly any new literary or musical production for all of the academic work, for all of the university literature programs and music departments. When was the last time you heard of some great breakthrough in literature or music, other than just popular stuff? The sciences have largely stagnated. The arts have largely stagnated, and that's because the scholars, the scientists, the researchers, and so on, they really all share the same limited body of knowledge based on this modern curriculum that they've been raised in. This manifests itself in the course I'm taking right now, a Constitution course. And I'll just give you an explanation that illustrates this. We're studying and discussing the creation of the Constitution to really try to understand the influences and ideas and ends of the Constitution. And when we get into these discussions, we begin reading philosophers like Montesquieu. We read ideas from men like John Locke. We read political publications like Thomas Paine's Common Sense or James John Adams's Thoughts on Government. We can read the Federalist Papers with Madison and Hamilton and John Jay. And as we get into these writings, we can all read them. But most of the students that I'm studying with, and these are some smart folks, academically speaking, they really have no knowledge of the context behind the people and ideas that they're reading about. For example, to understand the differences among the states in early America, where these states were really divided along religious lines as different kinds of Christianity, different denominations. In Massachusetts, you had Puritans and Congregationalists. In New Jersey, you had Presbyterians. In Pennsylvania, you had Quakers. In Maryland, you had Catholics. In Virginia, you had Anglicans. That's what really united these people. They shared a common religion. They shared religious convictions with their fellow citizens in their different states. And this affected everything they did. This affected how their government was organized. This affected how they handled government in their different states. Their religion was real to them. They were serious about their religious convictions. Whereas for irreligious modern academics and students, they can't comprehend the reality that there are people who set religion before everything else. These people, these modern irreligious academics, also have very little knowledge of the religious beliefs and teachings and practices of these different groups. They really don't understand what the difference is between an Anglican and a Presbyterian, or a Baptist and a Congregationalist, or a Puritan and an Anglican, or a Catholic and an Anglican. They really don't understand the differences. And these differences explain all of the differences between these states. When we go back into British history, we look at the struggle between King Charles I, who was a Catholic, Oliver Cromwell, who was a Puritan, the rise of Parliament, which was largely a Protestant idea, fighting against what was then a Catholic monarchy. We then read about the Reformation. We read about Henry VIII rejecting the authority of the Pope. We read about the execution of Thomas More in 1535. These were religious struggles. And for people who don't understand these religions, the struggles are not understood. And this is the great limitation on modern scholarship. Modern scholarship celebrates its lack of religion. And yet this is what's responsible for the stagnation of these studies. The students really don't understand what they're reading. They don't have any valuable insights to offer into these different works. When they read the works, they really can't discern what's important, what's not important. They can't understand why the writers write what they write, and why they disagree so strongly on what are seemingly insignificant issues. The students just don't understand what they're reading. And in modern scholarship, the goal is to advance human learning by research, by writing, by subjecting your writing to what's called peer review in the modern academic community, and making yourself accountable to provide evidence for every assertion that you make, and to demonstrate that every judgment you make is the result of careful reasoning on the available evidence. And this is really the purpose of all of this modern scholarly writing. Now, Christians should be committed to this level of care in their thinking and writing to begin with. The fact that Christians don't already speak and write in a scholarly way is a symptom of the problem with modern Christianity. Assertions are made with no evidence. Quotes are used with no reference. Many of the quotes that are used are not even true quotes. People use quotes to support their arguments by going online and going to a website like Brainy Quote, searching for a topic, and then just copying and pasting quotes that are on the website with no reference to the source, if that quote was ever even spoken by the person it's attributed to. No one knows where the quote came from, what the context or intention of the quote was. It's this lazy, fake method of reasoning that really isn't sincere. It's not concerned with truth. It's just a way of pretending to have evidence for things you've already decided you want to believe. And Christians are as guilty of this kind of irresponsible, reckless speaking and writing as anyone else in modern society. When we look at modern scholarship, the demands of it are considered burdensome to most Christians, and they scoff at them as if providing evidence for your assertions is beneath Christians or some kind of absurd idea. The real reason why Christians don't like it is because they can't do it, because their statements don't actually have evidence. The quotes don't actually have known sources. They've never actually read these quotes in context through sincere studies. It's fake. And what's true of the Christians in the modern era is also true of the non-Christians. They do all the same things. And this is why modern politics is just such a giant train wreck. There's no sincere pursuit of truth. There's no careful examination of ideas. There's no accountability to speaking with certainty and avoiding assumptions or inconclusive arguments. No one cares about that stuff. Most people speak to be applauded by people who share their convictions rather than to be persuasive to their opponents. The Catholic scholars come and speak at Catholic events, and they talk all kinds of tough tough talk to a crowd full of people paying to hear them. They're not standing in debates with their actual opponents, who are the best of their opponents, the brightest and best. We're used to this culture of hanging out in our own little echo chamber with people who think like us and already agree with us, and then pretending that we're all rational and truthful. Whereas if we were rational, if we were truthful, if we were honest, if we were accountable to the facts and conclusive in our reasoning, there would be nothing hindering us from immersing ourselves in a diverse audience. There wouldn't be a need for a Catholic college where the Catholic students go, where everything is taught from a quote-unquote Catholic perspective. That's an echo chamber, and the same is true for secular institutions that do the same. The fact that we isolate ourselves in groups so we can pretend to be learning is a sign that we're not really interested in learning. And this has produced boring, fruitless academic activity. And I think that classically educated Catholic students can radically influence for good, for a number of reasons. First of all, a classical liberal arts education, and I'm not talking about fake classical education, I'm talking about real classical liberal arts education, not messing around with literature, not having these nonsense Socratic discussion great books classes. I'm not talking, that defeats the whole point. I'm talking about students who actually study the arts of grammar, the arts of reasoning, the arts of rhetoric, the mathematical arts, who study the ancient philosophical sciences, moral philosophy, natural philosophy, metaphysics, political science, and so on. From the ancient world, from the great secular philosophers, the pre-Christian virtuous pagans, who delivered to us everything that can be grasped by human reason. And then add to that the study of sacred scripture, of divine revelation, which reveals to us things that go beyond what can be grasped by human reasoning. And then to study through the church fathers, who reconcile philosophy and divine revelation, leading to scholasticism in the 13th century. And then coming up through medieval history, studying the history, the languages, the development of political systems, the development of the church, schisms in the church and the consequences of those schisms, the rise of new heretical religions like Islam. Understanding these things in their historical context, how they relate to one another, how they have related and interacted with one another, how that has influenced what we see in the world today, and bringing all of that knowledge of the arts and sciences, of philosophy and theology, of history, of politics, and so on, into modern research and discussion. That's what's lacking in modern universities. The students don't come into the university with that background, with that foundation. And so you've got the modern students, Christians included, who are all pretending to do something. And what you really lack are authentic researchers and students who want to know and prove the truth, which is the end of true scholarship. And like I said, what's missing in modern scholarship are classically educated Catholic students who aren't these wimpy, lukewarm, ashamed kids that we see, but who understand how America works, who understand what it means to live in a country where you have freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and who have the strength of character to be willing to go into a diverse environment, trusting in those freedoms, to engage with them and bring all of that Christian knowledge, assuming they have it. That's for them to prove first. But to bring all of that knowledge into that modern academic environment and to bring it to bear on modern scholarship, that's what's really lacking. That's why these modern sciences are stagnant. It's just a bunch of people kicking around the same exhausted secular ideas. It's easy to identify the fake learning. It's easy to identify fake learning. Fake learners are not seeking to understand things truly. They're not seeking the truth so that they can build their lives on truth. They're seeking to know what they need to do to get their diploma or to get their degree so that they can go apply for a job, because they're thinking about the car that they want or the lifestyle that they want or some other temporal concern, the things that the Gentiles seek after. They're not concerned with actually living a truthful life according to God's will. They're really not concerned with whether or not the things they think and the things they say and the things they do are true and right. That's really not their concern. School for them is just an artificial means to some temporal end, and they're content to accept whatever the standards are for that end. And that's not what it means to be a student. That's not true academics. That's not true scholarship. And this is almost universal, even among Christians today. That's why you'll see Christians just going to college to get a degree in education and get a teaching license so they can go work at a public school. They're not concerned with the principles, whether they're true or not. They're not asking questions about what should we be doing. They're just asking, what do I need to do to get that job, to get that paycheck, to get that thing? And then they start checking boxes. And it's easy to tell these people by the work that they do and by the lack of work that they do. I can see it even in grading student assignments. I was grading student assignments last night and this morning, which was what prompted this topic for a walk talk. If there's a difficult lesson, a difficult subject, important but difficult, the fake students are just concerned with getting credit for the lesson. And what they'll do is they'll look at the lesson. I don't even know if they read it, but they'll look at the questions on the assignment, and then they'll look to the lesson and try to find an answer that might get them credit for the question, and they will just string together phrases and words from the lesson and hope that that's good enough. They know, as students, they know that they don't understand the lesson, and they don't care that they don't understand it. They're just trying to figure out what they can put on the paper to get it past the teacher, to get a grade, to move on towards the goal, which is just the diploma. They don't care if what they write even makes any human sense. They don't proofread what they've written. They don't read it aloud to ask if it is clear and understandable. They just string together gibberish and hope that it sounds like they did the reading. And it's very easy to discern because, as I said, the sentences they write don't even make any sense. They don't even answer the question. And these students don't care if they've answered the question. They don't care if they've learned the answer to the question. They don't care if they've understood the content of the lesson. They will do anything necessary to get credit for the lesson so they can move on in their pursuit of the diploma. And it's very easy to discern these students. And I believe that there's a serious moral problem with these students because they're not concerned with truth. They're not concerned with understanding. And you can just see that they're willing to pursue their end by any means necessary. And that there's almost no distinction between what they do to try to complete assignments and cheating. Cheating is just the next step. But what they're doing is already a form of cheating because they're not following the instructions, they're not pursuing the ends of the studies, and they're actively trying to pretend that they're doing so. And it's impossible for them to believe that the work they're submitting is sincere. Very easy to discern. And unfortunately, because the standards are so low and because teachers are lazy, these students will often get the credit they desire because at least they turned in something. They'll get credit and they'll get bumped along through the system because all you need are C's in your classes to get your diplomas and degrees. And the system supports these fake students. And this is why modern scholarship is dead. Why modern schools don't work. Why you can have this modern fake classical education movement and so many people jump on board because they recognize that this is a means to their desired end, which is not the real end of education, but is just a temporal, materialistic end. That's why something like the fake classical education movement can exist and grow wildly. It reveals everything that's wrong about modern Christian culture. Now, a real student would understand that the subject needs to be understood, that he's not being asked to study anything insignificant. There's no busy work. And a real student, if he's assigned to read a lesson, the first thing that he'll do is read the lesson. And then he'll go to the assessment, and he'll look at the questions and see if he knows the answer to the questions. If he studies the content and understands it, he'll recognize what the questions are asking about because he's studied the text. And he'll then be able to answer the questions with understanding. And if after reading there's a question that he doesn't understand or he can't answer, then he'll either go back to the text and study more carefully, or he'll ask for help. He'll either tell his parents that he's having a hard time understanding, and his parents may arrange a tutoring session, or he may submit a question. But he'll ask for help because he's aware that he doesn't understand, and he knows that he's supposed to study to understand. And the right thing to do is to ask for help. And so it's very easy to identify a good student. The teachers often know, for example, there are questions that I put in assignments where I know the answer to that question is not actually in the lesson. For example, there's an assignment early in classical reasoning where I ask the students to name Aristotle's 10 categories, and they haven't learned them yet at that point in the study. And so you'll see the insincere student just write gibberish, pretending to understand and making himself look ridiculous. You'll see the lazy, careless student just leave it blank. And then you'll see the good student submit an email and say, "Hey, Mr. Michael, question 4 in this lesson, I don't think that's explained in the reading. I've read everything so far and I haven't seen the names of the 10 categories given." And I'll write back to that student and say, "Well done. You're right. It's not in the lesson." And I'll tell that student, if you just jump ahead 2 chapters, you'll see the list of the 10 categories. So just jump ahead, get the list, and write them in that answer. I'd like you to be aware of the 10 categories at this point, even though they're not in the lesson. It's very easy to discern between the sincere student and the faker. And these fakers go on to college. These fakers go on to get master's degrees and PhDs. These fakers go on to become teachers and even professors. They go on to become scholars who make a living writing gibberish that really makes no sense and contributes nothing to human learning. But those sincere students often move out of academics because they're able to go and do real things and solve real problems in the world. And they're tempted to do that at some point. We see examples of this in the famous inventors and developers like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and these others who, when they're college students, are already solving problems in technology and commerce, and they're tempted to just bail out on academics because they're already able to solve the problems, build the businesses, and make millions, if not billions of dollars. And so you see the best students, these sincere students, are often lured away from academics because of their advantages that have come to them through their sincere studies. And so scholarship doesn't get the best thinkers. It doesn't get the most sincere students. It doesn't get the best problem solvers. It doesn't get the most thorough investigators because they have many, many options. When I was 23 years old, I was given a full-time teaching position in charge of a classics department at a private school before I had even finished my bachelor's degree. I started a joint program where I was already getting my graduate studies started before I finished my undergraduate degree, so my undergraduate degree extended into my graduate study years. But I already was offered a full-time teaching position before I had my bachelor's degree. The kids that were, or I shouldn't say kids because there were adults, we were all adults actually, but the other students who were in my graduate school of education classes were trying to get their degrees so that they could get teaching jobs. And so they're doing everything they can to check all the boxes, to get their license requirements completed, to get their degrees, so that they could then take those degrees and licenses and start applying for jobs. I was already working full-time as a teacher, doing exactly what I wanted to do. And I got to a point where I said, I have no need of academics. I have no need of further academics. I want to work in the private sector. I want to work in Christian education. And none of this jumping through hoops and collecting certificates is necessary for real education. And so I left graduate studies, went into private Christian teaching around 2000, and by 2007, I had already moved up into administration and curriculum development, and in 2008 I founded the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. So I spent really 8 years teaching, starting to teach before I even finished my college studies, knew that all of this artificial licensing and degree stuff didn't apply to real-world education, especially private education. And within 6 years of finishing my academic studies, I was already running and developing my own academy. Because I was a real student. I was studying things that the curriculum didn't even require. I was asking questions that were beyond the questions the professors required. The professors knew that. That's why they gave me recommendations and references for teaching jobs before I was even finished. But the problem is, real students can succeed without all of the artificial certificates and licenses and things like that. And they often bail out on academics because they know that they're not dependent on them, whereas others continue in them because they can't succeed in the fields independently or privately, and therefore they depend on the whole artificial system of degrees and certificates and licenses and all this other stuff. And so the people who end up in scholarship are often not the best students. And what would be great, and what I'm realizing right now in my life, is now that I've already established myself professionally, established my business in education, provided for my family, and am seeing my kids move into adulthood independently, and I can feel the strain of these family years beginning to ease, I see an important responsibility to go back into academics with all of my experience, with all of my sincerity, and try to contribute in some meaningful way. Now, there's no reason why students can't do this from the beginning. There's no reason why students can't say, I want to contribute to human learning through academic research and teaching and studies. I want to devote my life to scholarship. That's awesome. And it would be great if more sincere students did that. But like I said, they're going to be tempted out of academics all the time. But it would be great if they did that. And for students going to college as Catholics who have the advantage of having a real classical liberal arts education with a foundation in true philosophy and Catholic theology, they have to understand how they can contribute to modern scholarship. Because there are so many opportunities and there's really very little competition, because most of the students that they'll be associated with really have no clue, because they're limited by this modern secular mind. Now, what's important in scholarship is working to advance human learning through research, through reasoning, through experimentation, and so on. And what's needed are creative insights, creative solutions to problems, creative, intelligent hypotheses that are then followed up by cunning research that advances learning. That's the real work of modern scholarship. And you can see most students don't have those virtues. But that's what's really needed. To ask the right questions, to identify the problems, to propose intelligent, creative solutions, and then to carry out exhaustive, cunning research. And I say cunning because research is a skill. To know what to look for, to know where to find it, to know how to find the evidence that's needed, requires wisdom, requires cunning, subtlety, shrewdness. And Christians who are raised with a classical liberal arts education, studying the sacred scriptures, learning the Proverbs, for example, they should be the people that have this subtlety, this cunning. If you read the opening of the book of Proverbs, you'll see that's the purpose of the book of Proverbs, is to give that subtlety to the simple. And again, in modern society, most Christians never even study these things. They're as clueless and as unhelpful as anybody else for all the talk. But classically educated Catholic students really need to understand modern scholarship as a mission field that needs their help. But they've got to have the foundation of liberal arts skill and philosophical understanding to be able to engage in these fields intelligently and helpfully. Now for me, as I said, I didn't have that perspective of the importance of academics when I was 23 years old. I actually saw it as a waste of my time because I could already do what I wanted to do without the help of the academics. But now, as an older man, I see the importance of going back and contributing to research and scholarly writing, which I hope to do for the rest of my life. But I would like my students to understand the importance of this work as an end of their classical Catholic studies. I'd like them to see professional scholarship as an occupation, as a future for where their classical Catholic studies can lead them. And what's great about academics is that they can have interests in any different field, but put their classical Catholic learning to work in those fields through research and writing and experimentation, problem solving, and so on. And if you think of all of the colleges and schools and universities and all of the positions that need to be filled, all of the research opportunities, the opportunity for private research, private writing, and so on, I would like for students to not say, I'm going to study and then I'm going to become an engineer, or I'm going to become a doctor, or I'm going to become a lawyer. I'd like them also to think of how they're going to contribute to the advancement of human learning, because the secular idea of the advancement of human learning has more or less reached its end. It's been tried and found wanting. But the mechanism that's been created, the system of academic work and scholarly research and writing and experimentation, the system that's developed in secular society is really a powerful instrument. But it needs the light of Catholic faith, of scholastic philosophy to guide it. And that's where I'd like to see Catholic students get involved in the future. So if you've got a student, or first of all, if you're an adult and you're sort of over the hill in terms of your own career and life is starting to calm down, and you're zealous for learning and you're zealous for study, and you're a sincere student like the one I've talked about, and you've got experience to contribute to a certain field, I'd like to encourage you to consider re-engaging with the academic community and doing scholarly work as an older researcher and scholar. And for younger students, I'd like them to consider the importance of research as a career and understand how to go about that, and how their studies in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy can prepare them for modern scholarly research, experimentation, and writing. If any students are interested in learning more about this and having opportunities to learn how to do this kind of research and writing, I would be happy to work with them privately. I'd like to help students understand how all of this works and help them to develop the skills that are needed for this kind of research and writing. I'm not going to offer this generally because for most students it would be a waste of time. But for students who excel in their studies, who are sincere learners, who really want to know what's true and prove it, I encourage them to get in touch with me, and maybe what we can do is organize something of a private study group that works on these skills. These are the skills that colleges and universities of the highest caliber are really looking for. But students need to volunteer for this kind of work. It can't be imposed on students because they simply won't do it. It's only for the sincere. So if any students are interested in this kind of work, I'd like them to get in touch with me, and we'll begin to form something of a private group of Academy scholars that begins learning how to research, learning the tools that are used in real academic research, learn how to write as a scholar, in terms of writing with the kind of scientific exactness, providing evidence for assertions that are made, forming conclusive arguments, and also analyzing the works of others by learning how to write reviews and things like that, where we take scholarly work that's published by others and put it to the test and review it. These are important works in scholarship, and I'd like for students to learn how to do this work and get a head start on it, ideally so that I could help some students gain admission into the best schools and universities, where they can gain even more advantages in this work. But they need to get this started when they're younger and learn how to put their interest and skill, their intellectual gifts and so on, how to put them to work in a meaningful way. So if anyone's interested in this, if any students are interested in this, get in touch and we'll start working together to move forward with this. I hope that's helpful. God bless.